Next, we're going to do some techniques that will show you some different ways to add texture to a watercolor painting. I'm going to start with scratch lines, and with the scratch lines here, you're going to need kind of a nice thick layer of paint on your paper. You know, in this situation, thick just means a little bit darker. You don't want it completely covering the surface of your paper. You do want to still be able to see, you know, that you are working on top of the paper because you don't want it to get sticky. But then you're going to take a plastic palette knife and just scratch some lines into your paint. Now it's going to kind of push some of the paint around, and you're going to be able to see then the scratched surface a little bit better as the paint dries. Next up is working with resist. With resist, you're going to need a white crayon and just do, you know, a little bit of coloring there within that box. And then use paint, you know, a nice layer of wet paint on top of the crayon. You'll notice that the paint will not absorb onto the paper where the crayon sits because the wax is blocking it from getting to the paper. So if you know that you need to have white on your paper and don't want to just leave the paper white, you can also use a white crayon to set up a layer of resist. I'm just kind of spreading that paint out so that, again, I don't get a really thick layer of watercolor paint on the paper, which can stay kind of sticky. Next up is blotting, and with your blotting technique, you are going to be using a paper towel on top of your wet painted surface. So I am putting, again, a nice layer of red paint into this next section. This would be an excellent technique if you're wanting to add clouds to the sky, because as you use your paper towel, you're just going to pick up some of that paint. You'll never pick it all up, but you'll start to pick up some of it to create a lighter layer within your paint color. Next up then is salt. So when working with the salt, you can use regular table salt or you can use a thicker kosher salt, but we need to start with wet paint on the section here, and you want to make sure that you have enough color there. The salt will not have as dramatic of an effect on a lighter application of paint. So I'm trying to kind of vary my lightness and darkness, but then I'm just going to take a small pinch of the salt and sprinkle it right on top. Now I don't want to move the salt because the salt will absorb the paint as it dries. And then my last technique is working with saran wrap. So just like I've been doing, I'm going to put a nice layer of paint within this section, because again, the more paint I have, the more dramatic the effect will be, but I don't want it to be super thick as well. But then I take my saran wrap and place it on top of the wet paint, and then I'm not going to move that saran wrap until it is completely dry. You are now done with the watercolor pan bootcamp and are ready to move on to working with the watercolor pencils.